The whole village forgot how to breathe when the royal horn sounded at sunrise. 4 white horses stopped at the edge of the dusty square, their silver harnesses catching the first gold light of morning. And behind them came the Queen's Guard, in blue and bronze, walking in perfect silence toward the smallest hut in Kijani village. The hut with the broken roof, the leaning fence, and the 3 clay jars standing beside the door like tired soldiers. From that poor hut stepped a woman with bare feet, a faded wrapper, and the face of someone who had known more struggle than comfort. The day before, the same people now standing in shocked silence had shouted at her, laughed at her, and chased her away like she had no right to stand among them. But this morning, the Queen herself had come asking for her by name. How does a woman with no land, no husband, no title, and no powerful family become the one person the palace refuses to leave behind? Stay close, my friend, because this is not only a story about power. It is a story about thirst, dignity, shame, and the kind of heart that reveals itself only when nobody important is watching. Her name was Abeni. In Kijani village, where the earth turned red in the heat and the thorn trees leaned over narrow footpaths, everyone knew Abeni. Not because she was important, and not because she was the kind of beauty that makes crowds stop and stare, but because every morning before sunrise, she walked to the Nomba River carrying 2 empty clay pots balanced across her shoulders. She sold water in the market. That was how she lived. A cup for cooking, a cup for washing, a cup for a child too tired to walk home in the heat, a cup for an old woman whose knees could no longer make the journey to the riverbank. She charged little because she had little, and poverty has a way of teaching a person exactly how much can be spared without breaking tomorrow. 3 years earlier, her husband, Kojo, had died beneath a tree that fell in the heavy rains, and when he died, everything that had protected her died with him. The rented field was taken by relatives. The goats vanished one by one. Even the small carved stool Kojo had made with his own hands disappeared under the excuse of family settlement. What remained was the hut, the jars, the sleeping mat, and Abeni. But listen carefully, because this matters. Abeni was poor, but she was not bitter. She still greeted people first. She still shared fire when another woman's charcoal had gone cold. She still gave water to thirsty children before counting coins. She understood what it meant to need something simple and receive nothing. That knowledge had made her soft in the places where hardship often makes others hard. Now every village has 2 lives, the life people are truly living, and the life they perform for one another. In Kijani, the woman who performed life best was Madame Zuri. Her compound was the largest near the market road. Her walls were painted fresh every season. Her wrappers were always crisp. Her voice always sounded like she expected to be obeyed. She had 1 daughter, Nadira, tall, graceful, beautifully dressed, and taught from girlhood how to move as though a better life was already waiting for her. Madame Zuri had spent years training Nadira to be admired, how to smile without seeming eager, how to bow without seeming small, how to speak so people felt they were already standing before someone destined for higher things. Because by then, word had spread through the river villages that Queen Safia would soon pass through the region on her way to the southern capital. There would be welcoming ceremonies, gifts, songs, chosen women to stand before the royal party and represent the village with grace and honor. Madame Zuri had decided long before the Queen arrived that Nadira would stand at the very front. Not because she had been chosen, because her mother had chosen it in her own mind. And sometimes the plans pride makes in secret become more dangerous than open cruelty. The day everything changed came wrapped in heavy heat. By noon, even the market flies moved lazily. Goats slept in shadows. The river ran low against black stones, and the air smelled of hot dust and tired leaves. Abeni had sold almost nothing that day. Too many families were saving their coins for cloth, beads, and appearances. Everybody was preparing for the Queen's visit, and in such a season, people will spend on what can be seen before they spend on what is needed. By late afternoon, Abeni had 1/2 jar of clean water left. That was all. Enough for her evening meal, enough to wash the dust off her feet, enough to carry into tomorrow if she guarded it carefully. She balanced the jar against her hip and started home along the narrow path by the tamarind trees. That was when she heard crying. Not a full, loud cry, not the healthy cry of anger, but the thin, broken cry of a child trying to be brave. Abeni stopped, listened again, and pushed through the tall reeds by the river bend. There she found a tilted cart stuck in mud, one wheel broken, and beside it, a woman in dusty but finely made travel clothes, kneeling beside a little girl whose ankle was bleeding. One of their bundles had split open in the fall, scattering cloth, herbs, and small possessions across the wet ground. The woman looked up at Abeni and said only one thing. "Please, do you have water?" Abeni looked at the half jar in her hands. She knew exactly what it meant. That water was supper. It was tomorrow's start. It was relief after labor. It was safety. But some choices arrive already knowing who you are before you even make them. She knelt beside the child and gave her the first drink. The girl drank too fast and coughed, and Abeni steadied her with one hand while holding the jar with the other. "Slowly, little bird," she said softly. "Water must be welcomed, not attacked." The woman almost smiled, but exhaustion pulled her face downward again. She said her name was Mirembe. The child was Lulu. Their driver had gone ahead toward the village for help after the cart broke, but dusk was coming, and nobody had returned. Abeni used the rest of the water to clean Lulu's cut ankle. Then she tore a strip from the inside hem of her own wrapper and bound the wound. It was not deep, but it frightened the child. When Abeni asked if she could walk, the girl tried to stand and nearly fell. So Abeni made the kind of choice people praise in stories after the danger has passed, but rarely make in real life while it still costs something. She lifted Lulu onto her back, gathered the torn bundle with one arm, and led the stranger to her hut. Inside there was almost nothing to offer. A mat, a charcoal stove, one bowl of cassava from the morning, a little groundnut paste, the last cup of millet flour tied in a calabash. Abeni lit the stove. She mixed the millet. She stretched the groundnut paste thinner than it deserved to be stretched. She gave the child the softest portion, and the woman the larger share. When Mirembe protested, Abeni only said, "Guests do not argue with hunger in this house." That evening, for the second time that day, Abeni chose someone else's need over her own. Lulu slept on the mat. Mirembe slept beside her. Abeni rested against the wall with a folded cloth beneath her head. Outside, night insects sang in the grass. Far away, drums practiced for the Queen's procession. Inside the hut, the air smelled of smoke, healing herbs, and wet earth cooling after a long day. Just before sleep, Mirembe asked quietly, "Why did you help us?" Abeni answered without drama, without philosophy, without any need to sound wise. "Because you were thirsty," she said. "And the child was afraid." Then she closed her eyes. Morning came with noise. The village was already awake, sweeping yards, polishing pots, arranging wrappers, and preparing songs. The Queen's procession was expected by midday. Madame Zuri had spent the early morning giving orders as if the village itself belonged to her. Nadira was dressed in royal blue cloth, with copper bangles and beads threaded carefully into her hair. The chosen women gathered near the market square, each carrying a gift basket or calabash, each trying to stand as though they were not competing to be noticed. Abeni had no time for spectacle. Lulu's ankle had swollen in the night. The child could not travel. Mirembe, though grateful, looked troubled. Their cart was still broken, their driver had not returned, and the road was too dangerous to walk with an injured child. Abeni looked at them, then looked toward the square where she could already hear women rehearsing welcome songs, and said, "Stay here. I will go ask for help." It should have been a simple thing, but there are moments when a poor woman asking for help is treated not as a human need, but as an insult to someone else's performance. When Abeni reached the village square, the preparations were almost complete. Palm leaves lined the path. Drummers stood ready. Women in bright wrappers arranged themselves in perfect order. Madame Zuri noticed Abeni at once, and her face tightened in annoyance. Abeni explained quickly. A traveler's cart had broken near the river. A child was injured, and they needed help carrying them or mending the wheel before the sun rose too high. Some people looked at her. Some looked away. Madame Zuri stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Not today," she said. "Can you not see what is happening here? The Queen is coming. Do you want strangers and accidents and dirty confusion in the middle of a royal welcome?" Abeni tried again. "The child cannot walk." Madame Zuri lowered her voice in that dangerous way people do when they want to humiliate someone politely in public. "Then let the child's people solve their own problem. This is not the day to drag your little burdens into the center of village business." A few women shifted uncomfortably, but no one openly contradicted her. Abeni stood still, feeling shame rise hot in her throat. "Please," she said one last time, "at least send one man with rope or tools." Madame Zuri gave a laugh that carried farther than it should have. "And if the Queen arrives while we are rescuing every roadside stranger you bring to us, who will answer for that? Move aside, Abeni. Do not disgrace this village today." The worst wounds are not always made by enemies. Sometimes they come from neighbors who know exactly where your dignity is weakest. Abeni looked around. No one stepped toward her. No one asked where the child was. No one said, "I will come." They were all too busy waiting to be seen by power. One woman muttered that Abeni always invited trouble. Another said poor people mistake chaos for kindness. Someone laughed. Then Madame Zuri, without touching Abeni, with only words and authority, pushed her out of the center of the square. "Go back to your hut," she said, "and do not bring this mess into the Queen's path." Abeni turned and walked away in silence. But humiliation has a sound. It is the sound of people pretending not to watch you after they have already judged you. She carried that sound all the way back to her hut. When she returned, she found Mirembe outside beneath the shade of the fence, holding Lulu close. The child's face was pale. Abeni did not describe what had happened in the square. She only said, "No one is coming." Mirembe looked at her for a long moment, and something changed in her face. Not surprise, not anger, but a kind of steady sadness, as if she had just been shown something she already suspected about the world. Then she asked, "Will you help me move the cart bundles into the shade?" Abeni nodded. Together they dragged what they could. Abeni fetched herbs from old Mama Sira for the child's ankle. She boiled leaves, made a compress, and sat fanning Lulu while the village drums grew louder in the distance. From the road came the rising swell of ceremony. The queen had arrived. Back in the square, Madame Zuri and Nadira shone exactly as planned. Songs rose, gifts were lifted, heads bowed low. Queen Safia's procession entered beneath cloth banners and praises. She sat high in the carriage, dignified and watchful, while her guards flanked the road in blue and bronze. Nadira stepped forward beautifully. Madame Zuri smiled the smile of a woman who believes the world is finally behaving as it should. But something was wrong. A messenger approached the queen and spoke quietly. The queen's expression changed, not with alarm, but with attention. Then she raised her hand, and the music stopped. The silence that followed felt strange enough to unsettle the entire square. Queen Safia asked one question. "Where is the woman who gave water to my child?" No one answered at first because no one understood the question. Madame Zuri blinked. Nadira stood frozen. The queen looked across the crowd again, calm and exact. "This morning, near the Nomba Bend, a woman found my daughter injured, gave her water, bound her ankle, sheltered us through the night, and came here asking for help. Where is she?" The village did not breathe. Mirembe stepped down from the second carriage, no longer dusty and anonymous, but clothed now in the authority she had been carrying all along. She was not merely a traveler. She was the queen's widowed sister, charged with escorting young Princess Lulu ahead of the main procession. Their driver, it turned out, had been delayed farther down the road after seeking help from a neighboring settlement, when Kijani offered none. The cart had broken, they had been stranded, and the woman Kijani had dismissed, mocked, and pushed aside had been the only person who acted as though a thirsty child mattered more than a public performance. Madame Zuri's mouth opened, but no words came. Queen Safia's gaze moved over the women lined in ceremony, over the gift baskets, the polished beads, the arranged smiles, and the carefully rehearsed welcome. "She came to you for help?" the queen asked. No one wanted to answer, but truth has a way of standing up when lies become too small to cover it. An older man from the drummers lowered his eyes and said quietly, "Yes, Your Majesty." "And what did you do?" the queen asked. His silence answered before his mouth could. By then, a boy had already been sent running to fetch Abeni, but the queen did not wait. She stepped down from the carriage herself. The guards moved instantly, but she raised her hand again, and they stopped. "Take me to her," she said. That is why the royal horns sounded at sunrise the next morning outside the smallest hut in Kijani village. Because the queen had refused to let the matter end in a crowded square with half-truths and formal apologies. She wanted the village to see clearly where honor had truly lived all along. When the royal party reached Abeni's hut, Abeni stepped outside in confusion, her wrapper still simple, her hands dusted with flour from preparing a thin morning porridge. She looked first at the horses, then at the guards, then at the queen. And for a moment she seemed less afraid than bewildered, as if she still believed such power must have mistaken its destination. Queen Safia walked to her without hurry. Then, in full view of the village, she took Abeni's hands in her own. "You gave your water to my child," she said. "You sheltered my sister. You asked your village for help, and when they refused, you did not refuse compassion. Yesterday, this place honored appearances. Today, it will honor truth." Abeni tried to kneel, but the queen would not allow it. "No," she said gently. "Stand. A woman who protects the vulnerable does not lower herself before me. There are silences that humiliate, and there are silences that reveal. This one revealed everything. Madame Zuri stood at the back of the crowd, looking smaller than anyone had ever seen her. Nadira, for the first time in her life, looked not polished, but ashamed. The queen turned and faced the village. "You prepared songs for my arrival," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the square. "But when Mercy arrived thirsty and bleeding, most of you turned your faces away." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. "This woman," the queen continued, "had less than all of you. Less cloth, less food, less safety, less voice. Yet she gave first, asked later, and expected nothing in return. That is honor. That is nobility. Not the wrapper, not the beads, not the practiced smile." Then she asked for Lulu. The little princess, ankle bandaged, was brought forward from the carriage and led carefully toward Abeni. The child smiled shyly and held out a small hand. "She called me little bird," Lulu said. A sound moved through the crowd then. Not laughter, not speech, but the uncomfortable sound of people watching their own values be measured and found lacking. Queen Sophia asked Abeni what she needed. It was a dangerous question because poor people are often expected either to ask for too much and confirm every cruel stereotype, or to ask for nothing and be praised for their suffering. Abeni lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked at the queen, and answered in a voice so steady it changed the air around her. "The child needed water. Your sister needed shelter. I did what was before me. If you ask what I need, then I ask first for the river path to be repaired so women stop falling with heavy loads in the rains. And the market well should be deepened. In dry season, people fight over it." No one expected that answer. Not wealth for herself, not fine cloth, not a title, not vengeance. A need bigger than her own hut. Queen Sophia studied her a long moment, and then the queen smiled the rare smile of someone who has found exactly what she was no longer sure still existed. "You ask like a guardian," she said, "not like a beggar." Abeni replied softly, "Begging and asking are not the same thing, Your Majesty. One empties a person. The other tells the truth." That day the queen ordered 3 things before leaving Kijani. First, the river path would be repaired before the next rains. Second, the market well would be dug deeper and lined with stone. Third, Abeni would be brought to the provincial court after harvest, not as a servant, not as an entertainer, not as a curiosity, but as an advisor to the Women's Water Council the queen intended to establish along the southern river belt. The village gasped at that. Madame Zuri nearly lost her balance. A poor water seller, a widow from a broken hut, invited into governance? But Queen Sophia had seen something beyond status. She had seen judgment, courage, restraint, and compassion under pressure. The very things most officials lacked while wearing fine robes. Then the queen turned once more toward the gathered villagers and said, "Let this be remembered. The worth of a community is revealed by how it treats a need that cannot reward it." As for Madame Zuri, consequences came, though not in the loud way gossip prefers. The queen did not strip her in public or disgrace Nadira with mockery. Power used cruelly only teaches fear. Instead, Queen Sophia ordered that the women chosen to represent Kijani in future ceremonies would no longer be selected by wealth or family standing, but by a council of elders, traders, mothers, and laborers together. Madame Zuri's influence ended that morning without a shout. Sometimes, losing the right to control the story is punishment enough for those who lived by controlling it. Nadira, who had spent years being polished for admiration, quietly left the crowd before noon and later went to Abeni's hut alone. She stood outside the broken fence with no audience to watch her and said, "I did not speak when I should have." Abeni looked at her for a long time, then answered, "Silence is also a choice. But different choices can still be made tomorrow." Nadira began to cry then, not the elegant cry of wounded pride, but the rough, honest cry of someone who has seen herself clearly for the first time. That, too, was a beginning. Months passed. The river path was repaired. The market well was dug deeper. Fights over water lessened. Women with heavy loads no longer slipped so often in the wet season. Abeni traveled to the provincial court after harvest, exactly as the queen had promised. She did not go dressed like somebody else. She went as herself, clean, dignified, and unashamed of where she came from. At court, she spoke plainly about water routes, carrying burdens, unsafe wells, the hidden cost of fetching water before dawn, the girls who missed lessons because of it, the widows who paid more for broken jars than wealthy households paid for abundance. People listened, not because her voice was loud, because truth, spoken from lived knowledge, carries a weight education alone cannot imitate. In time, the Women's Council expanded. New wells were mapped. River crossings were marked more safely. Storage jars were distributed in drought seasons. Abeni's name began to travel farther than she ever had on foot. But the most remarkable thing was not that she became known. It was that she did not become proud. Every time she returned to Kijani, she still stopped first at the river. She still greeted old Mama Sira before entering the market. She still lifted water cups for children with her own hands. She never allowed palace respect to make village labor beneath her. And people noticed, especially those who had once looked away. Over time, Kijani changed. Not suddenly, because villages are like old trees, and old trees do not bend in one day, but slowly, root by root. More people began stepping forward when trouble appeared. More women spoke in the square. More men listened. Nadira eventually became a teacher for young girls in the next settlement, teaching them not how to be admired, but how to read, count, and speak without fear. Madame Zuri grew quieter. She still wore good cloth, but something stiff in her spirit had cracked. Public embarrassment had not made her noble, but truth had made pretending more difficult. That is sometimes the beginning of wisdom. Years later, people still told the story of the morning the queen's horses stopped outside the poorest hut in Kijani. Children who had not yet been born when it happened could still point to the repaired river path and say, "That was because of Abeni." Women at the market could still lift water from the deeper well and remember. And whenever the dry season came hard and tempers grew short, somebody would repeat the lesson aloud so the village would not forget it again. That honor does not always announce itself in silk, and dignity does not need witnesses to be real. The true heart of a person is not revealed when music is playing, when eyes are watching, when power is near and rewards are possible. It is revealed in the quiet moment by the river, when somebody thirsty asks for help, and the world offers you every excuse to walk away. Abeni had almost nothing that day. Half a jar of water, a little food, a torn hem, a tired body. And still she gave. That was where everything began. Not in the Queen's carriage, not in the decorated square, not in the ceremony. It began at the edge of the reeds, with one woman hearing a frightened child cry and deciding that compassion was more urgent than comfort. And that, my friend, is why an entire kingdom remembered her. Because long before the Queen called her the true honor of the land, press the subscribe button for many new untold African folktales, only on Untold African.